A homeless black boy stood in front of his car, blocking the way. "Don't drive," he warned. "Your friend cut the brakes." What happened next revealed a shocking betrayal and left the millionaire questioning everything he knew about trust and loyalty. The morning sunlight glinted off the sleek black Mercedes as it idled at the curb, a symbol of wealth and success in the bustling city. Ethan Warren, a self-made millionaire in his mid-40s, adjusted his designer suit in the rearview mirror. His day was packed with meetings, but first, brunch with his closest friend Marcus. Marcus had been a confidant and business partner for over a decade, someone Ethan trusted implicitly. As Ethan reached for the gear shift, he noticed movement in the rearview mirror. A boy, no older than 15, with matted curls and wearing a tattered hoodie, was sprinting toward the car. Ethan frowned. He had seen the boy loitering outside the cafe earlier and assumed he was panhandling. The boy, visibly out of breath, waved his arms frantically as he darted in front of the car. Ethan's instinct was to press the horn, but the sheer desperation in the boy's face made him hesitate. Rolling down the window just an inch, Ethan's voice was clipped. "What do you think you're doing? Get out of the way!" The boy shook his head vigorously, his voice cracking as he shouted, "Don't drive! Please listen to me. Your brakes. They're cut." For a moment, Ethan froze. The boy's words seemed absurd. A stranger, talking about his brakes. His gaze dropped to the boy's trembling hands, dirt under his nails, and the raw fear in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Ethan demanded, his tone sharp. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me," the boy pleaded, his voice urgent. "I saw it. Your friend. The guy in the blue suit. He messed with your car. I didn't know what he was doing until I saw the brake lines." Ethan's blood ran cold. Marcus had arrived earlier, wearing his signature tailored blue suit. Ethan had thought nothing of it when Marcus had offered to grab a charger from the car while they were inside the cafe. "This is ridiculous," Ethan muttered under his breath. But something in the boy's voice, raw, earnest, almost panicked, held him back. "Why would he do something like that?" Ethan snapped, gripping the steering wheel tighter, though his foot remained on the brake. "I don't know," the boy admitted, his words tumbling out. "But I'm not lying. You have to check. Just don't drive, okay?" Ethan's mind raced. He could hear the impatient honks of cars behind him as the boy continued to stand firm, blocking the way. He didn't want to believe the boy, but a seed of doubt was planted. Marcus was his closest friend, but could there be any truth to this wild claim? Reluctantly, Ethan stepped out of the car, his polished shoes clicking against the asphalt. The boy followed, pointing urgently to the underside of the car. Ethan knelt down, feeling a flash of annoyance, until he saw it. His breath hitched. The brake line was visibly severed, a clean cut that couldn't have been accidental. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he straightened up, his gaze locking onto the boy. "How did you... Why did you..." Words failed him as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The boy shuffled nervously, clutching his hoodie. I didn't want you to get hurt, that's all." Ethan stared at the boy, his mind spinning. His closest friend had done this. The man he trusted with his business, his family, his life. But why? Ethan's world, so carefully built, suddenly felt like it was crumbling beneath him. And this boy, a stranger with nothing, had saved him. Ethan's hands trembled as he rose to his feet, his breath shallow. His gaze shifted from the severed brake line to the boy standing before him, nervous but resolute. You saved my life," Ethan murmured, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The boy looked down, scuffing his worn sneakers against the pavement. I didn't think it was right. I'm sorry if I scared you." Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Marcus. The name on the screen sent a jolt through him. Swiping to answer, Ethan forced his voice to steady. "Marcus, Hey, buddy. Marcus's smooth, familiar tone came through. Where are you? I'm at the restaurant waiting. We've got a lot to discuss. Ethan's stomach twisted. He wanted to lash out, to demand answers, but he knew better than to confront Marcus over the phone. Instead, he kept his tone measured. Something's come up. I'll be there soon. Hanging up, Ethan glanced back at the boy. What's your name? Jay, the boy replied, still shifting uneasily. Jay, Ethan repeated, nodding slowly as if committing the name to memory. You said you saw Marcus cut the brake line? Are you sure it was him? Jay nodded emphatically. I was sitting by the dumpsters when I saw him messing with your car. At first I thought he was just cleaning something, but then he pulled out a knife. I didn't know what he was doing until I saw the fluid leaking from under your car. I didn't know if you'd believe me, but I couldn't let you drive away. Ethan's chest tightened. The thought of Marcus, a man he'd trusted implicitly, sabotaging his car made his pulse quicken. But why? What would drive him to do something so heinous? Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by Jay's hesitant voice. Are you okay? He nodded curtly, though the truth was far from it. Jay, you don't know what you've done for me. I owe you my life. Jay shrugged, his gaze dropping to the ground. You don't owe me anything. I just didn't want to see someone get hurt. Ethan studied the boy, noticing the way his shoulders slumped and how he clutched his hoodie like it was a shield. Where are you from, Jay? Do you have family around here? The boy hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. Not anymore. I've been on my own for a while now. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the reality of his own situation snapped back into focus. Marcus was waiting. And if Jay was right, the man wasn't just a saboteur, he was a potential killer. Jay, Ethan said firmly, I need you to come with me. I need someone who can back me up on what you saw. The boy's eyes widened. You mean, you're going to confront him? Ethan nodded. I have to. But I want you to stay safe. You don't have to do this if you're afraid. Jay squared his shoulders, a glimmer of determination replacing the nervous energy that had consumed him moments before. I'm not afraid. If it helps you, I'll come. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude as he unlocked the car and gestured for Jay to climb into the passenger seat. They wouldn't drive far, just enough to get to the mechanic's shop down the block, where Ethan planned to call for a tow. Minutes later, Ethan and Jay walked into the restaurant, the elegant clinking of silverware and hushed conversations, contrasting sharply with the storm brewing in Ethan's chest. Marcus sat at a corner table, his charming smile widening when he spotted Ethan. Ethan! Marcus stood, arms outstretched as if greeting an old friend. You're late. Everything okay? Ethan hesitated, forcing himself to keep his composure. Had a little car trouble, he said, his voice tight. But it's handled now. Marcus's eyes flickered briefly, a flash of something Ethan couldn't quite place. Was it guilt, fear, or just his imagination? Ethan slid into the seat across from Marcus, Jay standing behind him like a silent sentinel. Marcus raised an eyebrow, glancing at the boy. And who's this? This is Jay, Ethan replied evenly. He helped me out when I needed it most. Turns out he saw something interesting. Marcus's smile faltered for the briefest moment before he leaned back in his chair. Interesting? Do tell. Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping low. Jay saw someone tampering with my car this morning, said the brake lines were cut. Marcus's face remained neutral, but his hands fidgeted slightly, smoothing the tablecloth. That's awful. Do you have any idea who might have done it? Ethan didn't break eye contact. He said it was you, Marcus. The room seemed to grow quieter, the weight of Ethan's words settling over the table. Marcus's expression hardened, a flash of anger in his eyes. Me? That's absurd, Ethan. Why would I ever do something like that? Jay stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tension. I saw you. By the dumpsters. You were wearing a blue suit and you had a knife. You cut the line and walked away like nothing happened. Marcus's jaw clenched, and for the first time, Ethan saw a crack in his polished facade. You're going to take the word of some homeless kid over me, after everything we've been through? Ethan's voice was low and firm. This isn't just about Jay's word. I checked the car myself. The brake line was cut, clean as day. If you didn't do it, then who did? Marcus's lips tightened, his silence louder than any denial he could muster. Ethan's eyes burned into Marcus, the weight of their shared history pressing heavily on the table between them. He wanted to believe there was an explanation, some way to make sense of the unthinkable accusation. But Marcus's silence, his refusal to deny the charge outright, spoke volumes. Why, Marcus? Ethan's voice cracked slightly as he asked, the betrayal cutting deeper than he expected. We've built everything together. I trusted you with my life. Marcus finally leaned forward, his demeanor shifting. The charm he usually exuded faded, replaced with a simmering frustration. You think you know everything, Ethan? You think just because you've got the big house, the flashy car, and all the success that people like me don't have limits? Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Limits? What are you talking about? Marcus scoffed, his gaze darting to Jay before locking back on Ethan. You've always had the upper hand, the golden boy, the one everyone respects. While I cleaned up your mistakes, handled the dirty work and watched you take all the credit. Ethan shook his head, disbelief washing over him. This is about jealousy? You tried to kill me because of your ego? Marcus's fist hit the table, rattling the silverware. It's not just ego, Ethan. It's survival. Do you know how many times I had to cover for you? How many deals I had to salvage while you got the glory? His voice dropped to a bitter whisper. You never saw me as an equal. Just a tool to get you where you wanted to go. The pieces began to fall into place in Ethan's mind. Marcus had always been by his side, the friend he could rely on when things got tough. But had he been blind to the resentment brewing beneath the surface? Jay, who had been standing quietly, finally spoke. You were going to let him die. Over this. Over jealousy. Marcus turned to the boy, his expression hard. You don't understand anything, kid. You don't know what it's like to watch someone else take everything while you're left with scraps. Jay stepped closer, his voice steady despite the tension. I know what it's like to have nothing, but I also know that hurting someone else doesn't fix it. It just makes you worse. The words hung in the air like a challenge, cutting through the bitterness in Marcus's tone. Ethan glanced at Jay, a surge of gratitude and pride swelling in his chest. This boy, who had every reason to turn a blind eye, had chosen courage and integrity instead. Marcus, Ethan said, his voice now calm but firm, this doesn't end here. You tried to kill me. I could call the police right now and you'd lose everything, but I'm giving you a chance. Tell me the truth. Admit what you did, and maybe we can find a way to fix this. Marcus's expression faltered, the anger in his eyes giving way to something closer to regret. For a moment it seemed like he might speak, but then his jaw tightened, and he stood abruptly. I don't owe you anything, Marcus spat, throwing his napkin onto the table. If you think some street kid's word is enough to ruin me, go ahead, but you'll regret it. He stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Ethan and Jay in stunned silence. Ethan slumped back into his chair, the weight of the confrontation sinking in. I can't believe this, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Jay looked at him, his eyes filled with concern. What are you going to do now? Ethan sighed, staring at the door Marcus had just walked through. I don't know, but one thing's for sure. I can't let him get away with this. Ethan sat in silence for a moment, his mind swirling with thoughts of betrayal, anger, and uncertainty. Jay, the homeless boy who had risked everything to save his life, stood nearby, watching Ethan with a mix of concern and hesitation. "You don't have to trust me," Jay said quietly, breaking the silence. "But I couldn't just stand by and let it happen. I don't know why your friend did what he did, but I know you deserve better than that." Ethan looked up, his gaze softening. "Jay, I don't just trust you. I owe you my life." He sighed deeply, the weight of the day settling heavily on his shoulders. "Now, I need to make sure Marcus is held accountable." The next morning, Ethan stood in his lawyer's office, recounting the events of the previous day. His attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Victoria Hayes, listened intently, her sharp eyes narrowing as Ethan detailed the sabotage. "This is serious, Ethan," she said, leaning forward. "Attempted murder isn't something we can take lightly. Do you have proof?" Ethan nodded. "Jay saw him cut the brakes. I checked the car myself. The brake line was severed. I've already called the mechanic to document the damage." Victoria tapped her pen against her notepad. "A witness statement from Jay could help, but Marcus is going to deny everything. Are you ready for this to get messy? He might try to drag your name through the mud in retaliation." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He already tried to kill me. I'm not backing down." Victoria nodded. "Good, I'll start the process, but you should keep your guard up. People like Marcus don't go down without a fight." Later that afternoon, Ethan met Jay at the mechanic's shop, where the severed brake line had been photographed and logged. Jay watched nervously as the mechanic handed Ethan the documentation he would need for the case. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Jay asked, his voice unsure. "What if he comes after you?" Ethan placed a hand on Jay's shoulder, the gesture both reassuring and grateful. "Jay, you saved me. Now it's my turn to stand up for what's right. Marcus needs to face the consequences of what he did." Jay nodded, his expression resolute. "Then I'll back you up. I'll tell them everything I saw." Ethan smiled faintly, feeling a strange sense of pride in the boy. Despite everything life had thrown at him, Jay had chosen courage and integrity time and time again. A week later, Ethan and Jay sat in a police station, recounting the events to a detective. Jay's testimony was clear and detailed, and the evidence from the mechanic backed up his account. As the detective reviewed the case file, he looked up at Ethan with a serious expression. "We'll open an investigation," the detective said. "If what you're saying checks out, Marcus could face charges for attempted murder and reckless endangerment." Ethan nodded. "Do what you need to do. I'll cooperate however I can." As they left the station, Ethan turned to Jay. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Jay shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to. I don't like seeing people get hurt." In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the investigation was swift. Marcus was charged with tampering with Ethan's vehicle, and the evidence left little room for doubt. As news of the incident spread, Marcus's reputation crumbled, and his career was effectively over. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself reflecting deeply on the events that had unfolded. Despite the betrayal, he felt an unexpected sense of gratitude, not just for Jay's bravery, but for the lessons the experience had taught him. One evening, Ethan invited Jay to dinner at his home. The boy, still hesitant and unsure, looked out of place in the grand dining room, but Ethan made him feel welcome. "You've been through a lot," Ethan said, handing Jay a plate. "But you've shown me something I hadn't seen in a long time. What it means to do the right thing, no matter the cost." Jay smiled shyly, looking down at his plate. "I just did what anyone should do." Ethan shook his head. "Not everyone would have done what you did. And I want to help you, Jay. You shouldn't have to struggle just to survive. In the weeks that followed, Ethan helped Jay get back on his feet, enrolling him in school and finding him a safe place to stay. Their bond deepened, and Ethan found a renewed sense of purpose in helping someone who had helped him in his darkest moment. For Jay, it wasn't just a fresh start. It was a chance to rebuild his life with someone who truly believed in him. And for Ethan, it was a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there's always room for redemption and hope. As Ethan watched Jay flourish in his new life, he couldn't help but reflect on how close he had come to losing everything. The boy who had once been invisible to the world had not only saved his life, but had taught him a lesson about trust, loyalty, and the power of doing what's right.